Welcome back to Switch to Linux. So today we're going to have a look at a topic I should probably be covering in a little bit more detail here and there, but I just really haven't done so, and I'm going to try and do a little bit better of a job. But this kind of addresses a question that came on my channel today, and so we're going to have a look at what somebody had asked, or more of a comment. And then tomorrow, if you come back, I'm going to show you how to actually apply some of this stuff here. So we're going to start out with the comment. And if I come over here, the comment that was made is Gregorio. Hi, Tom. I looked around and saw many Linux distro reviews. They are pretty and fast to work. But I've not found reasons for folks as me that use AutoCAD, Inventor, SolidWorks, and other exclusive software for Windows stuff. Do you know these similar tools as I mentioned? I saw tools to run Windows software on Linux, have not tried them yet. All right, so we're going to have a look at Linux software and just a little bit of the philosophy surrounding here. So we're going to kind of do this, and I was actually going to do something a little bit differently, and I was probably recording for a good 45 minutes before I looked up and realized, no, my OBS was actually not recording. So I had to go back and redo, and then I looked everything over and said, that was longer than I would like, and I'd like to go into more detail as to the actual software I use in my work. And so I thought I'd do philosophy first, and then tomorrow, probably, unless there's something else cooler to talk about, tomorrow and probably at the latest Saturday, we will have a look at what software I actually use when I'm doing web design work. And then maybe we'll look at some other software as well. So with that being said, we're going to have a look at a few things. So this gentleman asks about some particular software. So apparently he is working in a situation where he has to use Windows exclusive software. And then he says that there are ways that you could potentially run the software on Windows. So we're going to have a look at a few different things. Now, obviously, this is Switch to Linux. And at Switch to Linux, I'm encouraging people to use a Linux distro where they can. And it looks like we have a kitty that wants to come say hello. Before I even started the video, I went out and asked all the kitties if they wanted to come on, and nobody came running or anything. But I start talking, and this guy likes to be where the noise is. So this guy came around, and so we'll kind of have a kitty here for a little bit. Maybe he'll live again. I don't know. If you didn't watch that video, I cannot get enough of that. Watch about 3 minutes and 50 seconds in on my Bodhi pros and cons. And this cat right here does the most awesome thing in the history of all cat videos ever and forever. I'm thinking of just, submitting it for the Kitty Cat Golden Lifetime Achievement Award. 3 minutes and 50 seconds on the Bodhi video. All right. So with that being said, though, we're going to have a look at a couple of factors. Now, at Switch to Linux, I'm encouraging people to use Linux systems where you can. But that is, again, where you can. There are instances in work or in job situations where we have to use the software that is dictated. So we would have to use Windows. And if we are working from home, we would have to have Windows at home. So how do you manage all this stuff? Well, there's a few different interesting concepts and philosophies. First, consider that you could have either different computers or different partitions or different hard drives to run different systems. For example, this computer here I bought as a Windows 8 computer, and it still runs Windows 8 when I have Windows. But I put 2 hard drives in here, and there is actually a video about how to do this. I call this the safer dual boot because these 2 operating systems will never interfere with each other. And that's the concern that you have on a dual booting computer, is you are concerned that the operating systems are going to interact with one another. Windows doesn't update, knocks out your Grub menu. Grub doesn't update, knocks out your Windows boot menu. And you have 2 operating systems fighting for each other. It's like a 2-headed monster. That's your challenge with putting a a dual booting on the same hard drive and relying on Grub or some other boot manager to get the operating systems to boot. So I have a whole video about how I did this system, and basically all it is each hard drive, there's 2 different hard drives in here, and each hard drive has its own bootloader, and so I just use the boot menu on the computer. So on this computer, I have the boot menu set up so that if I just turn the computer on with nothing, it boots into Windows 8. If I want to boot it into Linux, I should probably change this around just because I boot it into Linux like every day and Windows goes in there. Like I booted into Windows today accidentally. And I use Windows over there for, I use it for storing some files, and I keep a running archive of all of my emails over there. And so with that being said, if I want to get into Linux, I boot the computer on and I push the F12 key until I get the bootloader. I go down, I select the other hard drive and boot into Linux. Or it's set that if any bootable USB port is plugged in, it will boot off of that. So if I want to boot this into Ubuntu, I just plug my external USB drive into one of the USB 3 ports. And then once I do that, then it's going to boot directly into Ubuntu. So I can load this into 3 different operating systems and they never interfere with one another. So that's a good way to do that. If you need to run a Windows program, you can do that. So what are the applications? Obviously, if you have to run AutoCAD and it does not run well under Linux, then definitely go ahead and use your platform there, your Windows system. And that's actually can be handy in some ways because obviously gamers, gaming isn't quite as good on Linux as it could be yet. And so there's been a lot of strives towards that. There's been a lot of Linux channels come up dedicated specifically to gaming on Linux. And so you can look at some of those channels and see what some of them are doing. I do not do many video games, so I can't help you out too much there, other than to know that Steam runs just fine. And a lot of your games on Steam will now run on Linux. I know that a lot of games run fine on Wine on Linux. So, the one game that I actually play does run on Linux under Wine. So you have those options. All right. But another fun fact of keeping different computers running is that the computers will actually behave. What the companies that are tracking you see when you're running different operating systems, whether it's different boots on the same computer or whatever else, is it starts to think that it's different people in the household. So my Mac is over here. And when I'm booting up my Mac, and if I go onto YouTube on my Mac, all I see on there is music videos or CBC articles, because that's really all I use that system for. Okay, but if I happen to want to see, one is like a Linux channel. If I come over here, my Linux channel is logged into Chromium over here. So if I pull Chromium up and look at YouTube over here, I get all tech video recommendations. If I look at Firefox, because it's not just the different computer, it's the different browsers as well. But Firefox shows up mostly nutrition type videos because that's usually what I'm going to watch on Firefox YouTube that's not logged in. And then if I go into Windows 8 or Ubuntu, it gives me, again, just a lot of the nutritional type things because I'll watch a lot of those. Or cooking type stuff. And so each of the computers in my office look like different things. So this is actually another way to kind of confuse the data collectors. Is you keep your Linux systems for all the more personal things that you do. You use your Windows or Mac or whatever other systems you have for the work that you have to do or for the gaming. So if you don't have another computer option, or if you have a really nice beefy computer system, what you can actually do is you can run Windows inside of a VirtualBox. So if you go to Microsoft's homepage, you can actually download the ISO file. Now, it says here that you can burn this onto a USB drive or a DVD drive. I've never successfully put this thing on a USB drive. For some reason, I've never gotten a computer boot off of that. But I do have my nice copy of it down here. Give me a second. So I do have my nice copy of it, of Windows that I put onto a DVD drive here. Of course, you can see that I called it Evil Spy Operating System 10 from MacroSpy. So you know, that's what I have. If I need to run Windows 10 on a computer, I can do that. But the other thing is you can download this ISO image and you can run it inside of VirtualBox. So VirtualBox works just fine. Now, I don't actually do that on this computer here, but I do happen to have in here, I have my OpenSUSE Enlightenment, which runs Windows 10 on the VirtualBox. So that is an option. If you have to run certain types of software, you can run it on a VirtualBox just fine. And depending on your computer specs, you know, I think VirtualBox gets a lot of hate. I think a lot of that's because maybe you're running it on a computer without a lot of specs. You know, if you watch the first video that I did a full-scale recording of with a VirtualBox running was the Bodhi, I think it was the Bodhi Linux one. Man, that video ended up great, and the system ran just fine. Of course, that's what happens when you have a Core i5 processor that's a quad-core processor and 32 gigs of RAM. I was able to give that thing 8 gigs of RAM, and it still didn't even use 25% of my system memory. And the thing ran absolutely smooth out of the box. So, with that being said, that is an option for you. So, if my Windows 7 computer that I do a lot of my design work on were to crash out, I also do my accounting over there. And so if that were to happen, what I would actually do in that case is I'd just boot up this guy into Windows 8, and when I need to do my accounting, I'd just do it over here. But if this computer were to die on Windows 8, and I don't have another native Windows computer that confidently could run QuickBooks, I'd just spin up a VirtualBox here and install it, because it does turn out that, at least for now, it does not seem as though you need to activate Windows to keep using it. Now, you will get a watermark that says to activate it, and you cannot make customizations to the settings, which probably means that the Eye of Sauron is watching you ever so closely. However, all of that being said, not a real huge deal to run Windows inside of a VirtualBox. And of course, if you need to buy a license for it, you can buy a license for it and run that inside the VirtualBox on your Linux machine all you want. So that is another option for you, is to use the VirtualBox. So of course, over here, and we did land on this page here to just directly download the thing because I'm running this from Linux. It says you're not using Windows 7, 8, or 10, so we're just going to give you this instead of, it wants you to use some auto installer or something. I don't know. It wants to help you out in ways that I never found helpful. But if you come over here to Microsoft's page, it's Microsoft, and I just did a quick internet search for Windows 10 ISO image, and I landed right on Microsoft's homepage. You come down here, you select the edition that you want, and then you hit your confirm, and you'll get a copy of it to download. I want to say it's like 2 gigabytes maybe. I don't know, let's see. I've got a copy of it. Mm, 3.6 gig. So it's make sure you have enough to download a 3.6 gig file. And like I said, I've never successfully wrote that onto a USB drive and was able to boot a computer off of it. If you have had luck with that, let me know. And let me know what you did, because I was never able to get it. And I tried doing multiple different ways of getting the ISO on there. Burning it onto a DVD, though, that always worked, and that always booted the computer right up. So that's one of your options, is either have a computer with running Windows 10 on it for those software packages, or run Windows inside of a VirtualBox for those software packages. So you have those options. And really the idea for me with Linux is to keep your privacy under control. And so splitting things between 2 different operating systems is actually very good. It can pick out a couple different profiles potentially, but in reality, that's a fine way to go. So if you do need to keep using the very specific Windows programs and they will not run under Linux, Windows 10 is certainly an option. Now, the other thing that he had mentioned as a potential solution is to use Wine. So the Wine originally is an acronym for Wine is not an emulator, as you can see there on the page. It is a Windows compatibility layer that allows you to run Windows type programs. Now, as I've said in some videos recently, more and more distros are starting to come pre-installed with Wine on it. And I think that's a problem because not only does Wine allow you to run Windows applications, but it also allows you to run viruses. And if you do not need Wine on your computer, you should not have it installed. And it's, of course, always a safer option to use Play on Linux combined with Wine, because if you do a sudo apt-get upgrade on your computer and there's a new version of Wine, you might get that new version of Wine. And what I've found is that different versions of Wine behave differently with different Windows programs. With Play on Linux, you virtualize each one, which also will keep those viruses a little in check, but you virtualize each instance of programs that you want to run into Wine, which also means that you can control exactly which version of Wine is running. Because you might find a program that runs better under a certain version of Wine, and if you do find that, you want to keep that version of Wine running. So up here on the main site, if you want to know if a program runs, so he asked about AutoCAD. Let's see if AutoCAD runs under Wine. So let's do a search, and a lot of people just look at the various software packages to see how they run. So you'll see that depending on your version, it runs anywhere from Gold and Platinum, which means it runs really well, to Garbage, which means it doesn't run at all. So what I found is the packages that I was originally looking at, like Photoshop or Dreamweaver, is that the packages will work, but the installers don't. And so I never really bothered trying to get everything working. So here's Dreamweaver. You'll see again, they range literally every setting they have. Platinum, Gold, Bronze, Silver, Garbage. So various versions of this will run. The problem is the installers don't. And so you run into the issues with the installers. But you might check to see if your individual software packages you are interested in runs under Wine. And if it does, that's a great bonus. You can switch over to Linux and continue to use some of your Windows software. Okay, so that's one option you can do. The last option is find a open source alternative, or at least an alternative that is available. So you can have commercial Linux software. And I'd have to think about this, because this is a philosophy that was discussed recently on Linux Quest, and he has I think a weekly show where he does it with a friend of his, and they were discussing the issue of commercial versus open source and free software last week, or earlier this week maybe. And what they were talking about is, if Adobe came out with a commercial software, would people use it? And I would find myself, if you asked me that 5 years ago, absolutely. Ask me that now, I don't know. And the reason is Adobe is, like everyone else, they're going to a pure subscription model and an in-the-cloud model. And I'm not interested in either. Okay, I will not be paying Adobe X amount of dollars for the rest of my life. Ain't happening. Okay, ain't happening. There's times the month the bills get tight. And frankly, go check out, and I'm not even sure, did I do that one? Yes, I did. I did a tinfoil hat time on this trend of subscription model services. Okay, I feel subscription model services are going to bankrupt America. Let's not be bankrupt America. All right. So I find that everything is moving to subscription services, and something or another might only be $5 a month. But man, when you got 15, 20 services at $5 a month, that starts to add up pretty quick. And I do not need my software being $5 a month, or even $100, $200, $500 a year. Looking in perspective. Now, obviously, it's a great business model, but I bought my package of CS4 Professional the day CS5 came out. There were 3 copies left at Amazon, and I paid $1,000 or $2,000 for it. Okay, but I have not bought or paid for the Adobe product since. And for me, I'm an extremely small business on a shoestring budget. I do not have the money to be throwing it out. So if I could purchase software from Adobe that was a full compatible Linux software that was commercial, that I could purchase it now from them until I decide I need a new version, I'd do that in a heartbeat. Because I will tell you that what I do on web design on Linux, it is within 90% efficiency of what I can do on Windows because Adobe is so good. But I'm not willing to put out a subscription model service for all of these products to make that work. I just won't do it. So in that respect, you can come over here and say, well, I like using Photoshop for my work, and I want to know what is there out there that I can use. And so you type in on the alternative2.net, you type in what you want to replace. First thing it gives you is GIMP. Now, GIMP is a great software. It runs on Windows, runs on Linux, runs on Mac, BSD. It is a very nice software, and they are really starting to move it in a good direction. There's a few features that I use in Photoshop absolutely daily that GIMP doesn't do well, and so with that respect, it's not as good, but frankly, it does do the vast majority of what I need it to do. So GIMP is just fine. There's Paint.net, so you can see all of the different options, and these will tell you if it is commercial or if it is open source. Freemium, so there's a free version and a paid version. This one's discontinued. All right, so there's a lot of options there. So when I could not get Dreamweaver working and I needed to do work on websites, I just came down and said, all right, I want to look at replacing Dreamweaver. So what can I do for Dreamweaver? So here, there's several of these that I've never seen before, and actually there's becoming more and more of these that I've never heard of. So I might look into some of these to see how they look. And I've seen Genie being installed on more and more distros, particularly XFCE distros. I've seen this showing up. I've seen this one showing up that I've never worked with directly. I have tried Aptana. The problem with Aptana is I think it's not even being developed anymore. What I liked is it does have the support for FTP, and I'm going to show you how you can do that support for FTP when I do my web design video either tomorrow or the next day. But Aptana does use Java, and for that reason, I didn't really like it as much. It had some instability issues. What I settled on and liked the most is the Bluefish editor. It pretty much allows me to do almost everything. There's a few little clunkier parts, but as far as getting in and editing the files, it is gold. It's just how it manages the files is a little bit goofy. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And so that's some of the software I wanted to replace. Let's see, was there another one? Not sure if there was another software I was thinking of. I'm sure there was. Oh, you know what? QuickBooks. So QuickBooks, obviously, looks like they changed their link, but QuickBooks is what I use to manage my software. So this will give you like GNU caches available. And if I start any newer businesses going forward, which I'm looking at doing soon, GNU cache is actually what I'm going to use. But as far as converting my existing business, which has 7 years of client data on it, no, I'm not going to change away from QuickBooks anytime soon. There is FreshBooks, which is a commercial platform, but it is a web cloud-based, and so it will work just fine on Linux. Of course, that's one of the new big ones coming out. I'm not sure if Peachtree's on this list or not, but I think that's, again, Windows or Mac. So you can look up any type of software package you're looking to replace. So the one gentleman was looking up AutoCAD, so we're going to look at AutoCAD replacements. So depending on how you're doing it, if you're doing AutoCAD stuff for yourself or your own personal business or whatever, you can probably get away with using FreeCAD. I'm not sure if FreeCAD is cross-compatible or not. Now, I know that my brother has his video game business, and 3ds Max is now also moving to a subscription model, which is literally pricing indie game developers completely out of the market. So any of those people, Blender does pretty much all the same things. I found there's actually a lot more tutorials to use Blender online too. So you have that option. So here's a lot of different things. LibreCAD might be something to look into for that. OpenSCAD, NanoCAD. So there's a lot of things you can look at. Some of these are, this is open source. This one's freemium. So there's a lot of options that you can look at here for various systems. And it's the thing is that you, when you're switching over to Linux, you take this multi-tiered approach. One of the core things is that we as we're moving over to things, I'm not saying it switch to Linux. I'm not saying absolutely dump every other OS and switch over to Linux. What I'm saying is think about what you're doing and ask about the data being collected and see if there's other alternatives or other things that you can be doing instead. And I like the Linux platform because it does give me a lot more customizability and it does give me a lot more freedom in my own personal privacy. Like, I'm not opposed to people collecting some degree of information. I am opposed to the fact that it seems completely out of control, and that's really, for me, the big factor with it. And so with all of that being said, if you are in a job situation where you have to run with Windows, you might just have to always have a Windows computer around, or always have a Windows partition on your computer, or always run Windows inside of a VirtualBox, and maybe even just buy a licensing key for that VirtualBox, depending on how much you're using it. But there is Wine that you can look at to see if your Windows program can run under Linux, or you can look for an open source alternative. So again, that's just more of an overall broader philosophy. I'd really like to know for those people that are watching this that are using Linux, what is the job that you do, and how do you do your job on Linux as opposed to doing it on Windows or Mac? So I'm curious about that. And I know for me, when I put the Mac in my office, last year is the first time I put a Mac in my office, because as a web developer, I want to make sure I know how to use all of the different platforms and systems. And when I did that, I'm like, I'm not buying Microsoft Office. I threw LibreOffice on there. And I'll tell you that on my Windows computer, I still have my Office 2007 on there. So it's about a decade old now. Works great for me. But I'll tell you, if Windows kills that, which Windows 10 did kill Office 2010, I know 2007 works on it, and you might be able to reinstall it. But if you had Windows 8 or 7 in Office 2010 and you upgraded to Windows 10, it killed it. I've seen that happen a lot in many cases. But if that all happened to crash out, I'd just switch to LibreOffice full-time everywhere, because frankly, it does everything I need it to do. And it's just about on par with where it needs to be. And I love the fact I can customize all my toolbars and stuff. So there's about a good 30-minute video there, and just some basic overall philosophy. So either tomorrow or Saturday, whichever day I happen to get to it, we will look at how I actually do web design on a computer. I actually meant to do that on this computer. That's why I'm actually recording this on my other computer and not the new big beast. But all of that being said, what we're going to do is just look at the various alternatives that you have out there. You can look for open source alternatives or even commercial alternatives to your software. You can use Wine, or you can use a separate Windows partition, a separate Windows computer, or Windows on a VirtualBox to run your Windows programs. So those are some of the options that you can use Linux. And of course, with me, for the most part, this computer here, this computer is like perfect for me. It does all my media, it does my search engines and stuff, but I don't do a lot of work on this guy. I did do a work test. I did have a video on this computer doing an actual work test on my KDE review. If I think of it, I'll put a card in there so you can find that. And, pretty much the systems work great. I mean, I could not be happier with making a switch over to Linux for most of my systems. So this has been Tom, and the kitty wants to come up and say goodbye. So look at the camera over there, kitty. I'll get right there. And say bye-bye, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.